Kate Mila Falcher, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. Welcome back. It's Saturday. It's our Saturday book. We just finished episode number 1. So now we're on episode number 2 of The Hunt for the Skinwalker. Science Confronts the Unexplained in a remote ranch in Utah by Kelleher and Knapp. And I had to abbreviate video number 1 a little shorter than usual because I had to do something and I had a little bit of a conflict. I was hoping to get more in to the video before I ran out of time. So this might go a little bit longer. We'll just see how the chapters show up. I like to be consistent and not interrupt a chapter in the middle. So we're at the beginning of chapter 4, as I promised, called Weirdness. So let's find out how weird it really is. So we left the Gormans, this is their ranch, right? And we left them just deciding, well, we'll just pretend that weird 6 foot tall, almost 6 foot tall wolf thing that tried to kill our calf and scared the daylights out of us and seemed to disappear. We'll just ignore that. And that's exactly what they did. The neighbor told them, well, there are wolves. There's a large group of wolves that lives on the land here, meaning the basin. So they wrote it off to that. But then Ellen met one at the gate of the property one night when she drove up. She had to get out of the car to open the gate. She was after work. It was taller than the car roof. Okay. She said it was a bit smaller. Animal was with it, like a black weird dog. She and her brain went where your brain might go if you're a little shocked. Like, what kind of breed is that? The head of the thing was too big for its body. So apparently she had gotten the gate open before it encountered her. So she just drove home really, really quickly. And the next day she called up the tribal office to complain that they had wild animals and weird dogs roaming around. And she was told that there are no wolves around here. There have not been wolves around here for 70 years. The last one was shot in 1929. So the neighbor's seeing something too, but there are no real wolves around. So she was angry because she thought, okay, who's lying? Is it the tribal guy or is it the neighbor? I don't think anybody was lying. I don't think people knew what they were looking at. Anyway, this thing continued to show up on their property for weeks and then just sort of disappeared and stopped showing up. Other odd things happened. Ellen was walking one evening on the ridge. Now I have to say this. I'm sorry. I'm going to editorialize my way all the way through this book. If I lived there, I would not go out after dark. I'm just saying. So she was walking one evening on the ridge and a big thing flew by her very quickly. She felt the wind that it created and she ducked. But she couldn't see what it was. It was like the speed of something going past. It kind of happened to my grandfather once. If you've ever heard my story of my grandfather's experience of what he thought was a ghost. Well, it was in Ireland, so I doubt it was Native American skinwalkers. Anyway, then it happened again. Another time she was alone in the daytime. And so, she was at home. They worked on the ranch, but she was home alone. The kids were at school. Tom was out doing something. And objects kept disappearing and reappearing in odd places. So she wondered, is someone playing a game with me? Am I losing my mind? I have a poltergeist, so I go through this on a regular basis. It's very annoying. So this started happening to Tom, and that's when they knew, okay, something's up. He had tools that would be gone when he turned around. Once he was working on a fence, he was digging post holes. He had this post hole digger. If you've ever seen them, they're long handled and they have these weird blades on the bottom. And the thing weighed 70 pounds, 70 pounds. And he dug the hole and he put the thing down on the ground to do something. And when he turned back, it was gone. There was nobody around. It was just completely gone. And the whole family searched all over. They could not find it. 2 days later, a pair of pliers disappeared. And Ellen told him then about her experience of things just disappearing on her. And then they both started getting worried. He moved his prize herd. Now he is into these cattle. Moved them onto the ranch, and his nephew came to visit and help out one evening. And while they were doing whatever it was they were doing on the ranch, it was getting dark, they saw RV lights on their property at a distance, far enough away that it was dark. They saw the lights. They thought it was an RV, and they were concerned about poaching on the property. So they approached the lights, but as they approached them, the object, whatever it was, rose up off the ground, and they went closer to it, and the lights lifted over the fence and just stayed ahead of them. It paced them and stayed ahead of them. It was not an RV. They didn't know what it was. They chased it at a run, and he thought he had it cornered at a stand of trees with barbed wire. But the light was about 200 yards ahead. It rose up into the sky over the 50-foot trees. They saw it against the sky, and they realized, oh, okay, it's not a Winnebago. It's not an RV. It was oblong. They described that it looked a little bit like a long fridge with a front that had tail and tail lights in front and back, and it flew off with no sound. So he and his son and his nephew were understandably shocked. They were out of breath from the run. The nephew, who was 14, was crying. I mean, he was freaked out. They went home, and then the next day, after the nephew went home, his parents called Tom and said that no more visits to your ranch. Sorry. On another evening, Tom and Ellen were walking, and they saw they heard this metallic banging metal on metal sound coming from overhead, but they didn't see anything. Then after a while, they saw the lights of a vehicle, like they thought it was a vehicle on the ground, like the RV, 100 yards ahead. They're always out walking in the dark. I don't get it. 6-foot tall wolf, I'd stay inside. But as they approached this vehicle, it rose and moved another 50 feet away and came down and settled. Same fridge shape. And every time they got a certain distance from it, they approached it, it would take off. It would rise up and go farther ahead of them. They heard that metallic banging sound behind them again. They looked behind them. There was nothing. And when they turned back around, the object was gone. So they walked the entire boundary, the western boundary, and saw nothing. They began to hear that the property was cursed. Their ranch that they had just bought was cursed, and that no Native American would step onto it at all. And so naturally they wondered why, and they couldn't get anybody to tell them. So chapter 5, the curse. And this is where I may be skipping over some stuff. I'll tell you when I do. You'll be curious and you'll be frustrated because you'll want to know why. Suffice it to say that these things are best not spoken aloud to attract unwanted attention. So Southwest tribes have a legend of skinwalkers. These are shape-shifting witches in their lore that can turn into animal. Well, they're shape-shifting. And the book lists a few similar things from other countries. Europeans have werewolves. India have were-tigers. Africans have were-leopards and were-jackals. And in Egypt, were-hyenas. So there's some kind of hairy thing in every culture. The Southwest have the Navajo, the Hopi, the Utes, and some others that are not mentioned. And they all have some kind of a version of a malevolent shape-shifting witch that turns into animals. The Navajo skinwalkers use mind control on their victims to get them to hurt or even do away with themselves. They can run faster than a car. They jump mesa cliffs, like jump off of them with no problem. So there's a story of Michael Stoof, who's a lawyer, and he represents Native Americans in a lot of legal things in this area. He's very trusted. And he's trusted because he made it his business to understand Indian law and to respect their tribal religious beliefs. He began in the 1970s working for legal aid in Arizona. That's how he got involved. He had a case against, this is really interesting, he had a case against a witch in a child custody case, and financial support was all part of the case. This was a Navajo woman who was suing her ex, who was an Apache. The woman told her lawyer that the ex, the dad, took the children, one of the children, and kept him overnight. And the next day, the boy described being taken to a medicine man, and he described a ritual that included burying a doll, two dolls. One looked like the mother and one looked like the attorney. So the attorney freaked out, and he consulted a Navajo professor. And he said, this is a ceremony, he was told. This is a ceremony that's very powerful. If it's done more than four times, though, it backfires on the doer. And the performer of the ceremony, the witch or the medicine man, shaman, whatever, it'll backfire on them if they do it too often. Also, if the victim finds out, the curse goes onto the person requesting the curse, which would be the dad, the ex. So the attorney decided to let the dad and the medicine man know that he, the attorney, and the ex-wife who was suing the guy, they found out about their little ceremony. And the way the attorney let them know is he filed an injunction against the ex and the medicine man, who he called John Doe, a witch. The ex's attorney tried to explain it away. Oh, it was just a blessing. It was nothing bad. The judge was a Navajo, and he knew what it was. He knew it was a curse. And the ex knew it was a curse. And he gave full custody and back financial support to the mother. They're like, okay, we're not messing with this. The attorney said, I took it seriously because he did. And the witch's will assist the supernatural. This is the Navajo belief. The attorney says the Navajo believe in the power of witches, and it's a very strong belief. Some Navajo communities are actually strongholds of witchcraft. Not all witches are skinwalkers, but all skinwalkers are witches. They're a certain kind of witch. They're a sub genre of witches. They're actually the top witches. The witch's witch. They're pure evil in intent. Skinwalkers are pure evil in intent. I'm no expert on it, but the general view is that skinwalkers do all sorts of terrible things. Make people sick, commit murder, they grave rob, they're necrophiliacs, they're greedy and evil people who must kill a sibling or other relative to be initiated as a skinwalker. They supposedly can turn into weird animals and can travel in supernatural ways. So they can manifest in real ways. They're and they consulted an anthropologist about that, and he says he acknowledges the power of belief in the Native American community. They can manifest in real ways. They have been studied because the effects they have real effects on human health. Anthropologist David Zimmerman of the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department explains, skinwalkers are folks that possess the knowledge of medicine both practical to heal the sick and spiritual to maintain harmony, and they are both wrapped together in ways that are nearly impossible to untangle. Skinwalkers are not the same as necessarily tribal medicine men. Tribal medicine men train for years in mystical rituals. Dine is the name of the people. The U.S. Public Health Service works with them because their power has been proven in clinical studies. So traditional healers are very effective, and modern medicine would agree with that. So this next part, I wrote it out because I was reading the book and taking notes on it. And then I decided I'm not going to discuss this. I will go so far as to say it's about skinwalkers and the black arts. And that's as far as I'll go. I would recommend get the book and read about it. Part of the problem of even reading out loud about it is that you don't want to attract the wrong attention. So it's so sensitive a topic for the DNA people that it's hard to get information about it because they don't talk about it and it isn't shared. So to discuss it invites attention, so I don't want to discuss it. The book tells of encountering the encounters of a highway patrol guy. An innocent family was driving through the reservation and they were followed home by something. The authors would not investigate it. They just point out that there's a lot of power in fear. So, I feel like I'm protected. And there's an old saying that I've always loved: never trouble till trouble troubles you. So the local Navajo believe the skinwalkers' presence in the Ute Basin and has been for 15 generations. They're historically allied with the Navajo, and until they get horses from the Spanish, and they copied the Spanish slave trade. So that's when their cultures kind of parted ways. During the Civil War, the Utes were led by Kit Carson against the Navajo. Therefore, the Utes believe the Navajo cursed them. The Utes consider the ranch off limits because it's in the path of skinwalkers and it's cursed land. The skinwalkers don't live there. They just pass through there. They live nearby in the dark canyon. The tribe denies requests to explore the area. It has petroglyphs people like to go look at because they don't want to disturb the skinwalker. Their response to people who request going there is leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Dan Benishik is an anthropologist and an expert on Navajo culture, and he says it's unlikely that the Navajo would use skinwalkers for revenge because it's too self-serving. It backfires. It's the same in Western mystical arts. You don't want to do black magic. You don't want to do bad things to people, negative things to people, because that's bad karma. It's all the same belief, just different terminology. You don't want to do anything against a person to hurt a person for any reason. You just don't. It doesn't make sense. It's not good for them, but it's also really bad for you. But the Utes might believe that there is a curse, and they use the story to explain their own misfortune. In other words, it's all the Navajo's fault. Natives claim to see skinwalkers a lot and to use ritual protection. But white people see them too. And the skinwalkers and Sasquatch, those are kind of run of the mill in that area. The book tells of Skinwalker on a porch inside Fort Duquesne one day. Oh, look at here. And they tracked something. They went after it. They tracked it. They shot at it. But all they found was some blood. The tribal secretary's office tells of guard dogs intently watching. And he saw and smelled a large figured thing that smelled really bad, but it took off running, and the dogs in the area went nuts. He could follow the progress of the sound of this thing running away by the neighborhood dogs all starting to sound the alarm. So he and the officer that was with him were able to follow the path of this thing just by following the scattered garbage cans throughout the neighborhood. He said this figure was huge, but a flashlight would not shine on it. And it was extremely fast. It was seen again a few days later, huge, hairy, with red eyes, huge eyes. And so they're talking here about Sasquatch. Sasquatch, he's an old man that lives on a mountain. He just comes in and looks at people and then he goes back out again. He just lives there all his life, never takes care of himself, and just smells real bad. Almost like that guy, like he's dirty, dirty human being smell is what it smelled like. A real deep, bad odor. It smelled like dirty, bad underarms. The closer I got, the worse the smell. Could the creature he saw have been a skinwalker is the question. No. He says a skinwalker is smaller. A skinwalker is the size of a human, 6 feet and under. They don't come in most of the time to where the animals are. They come in when people are. They can come right here and you'd never know that he was standing here looking at you in the middle of the night. They can take the shape of anything they want to take the shape of. Like I said, they are medicine. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters. Oh, did I skip something here? Another little bit here. Yeah, the people who saw them on the road in Fort Duquesne described them as humans with dog heads smoking cigarettes. The witnesses weren't amused. Very ludicrous to see something like that, but it wasn't funny. They said it wasn't funny at all. Skinwalkers, they could shapeshifters like skinwalkers use mind control and appear to people through mind control as a Bigfoot or UFO. Could they mutilate cattle, be poltergeists? Well, it's an open-ended question. So chapter 6, we're on chapter 6, high strangeness. Gorman spent a lot of evenings trying to intercept intruders that seemed attracted to his cattle, even when it was 30 degrees below zero. Ugh. One night he said he saw aircraft, like a small hybrid of a B-117, and no, I'm sorry, an F-117 and a B-2. So some kind of, recognizable aircraft, like those two airplanes had a baby, is what this thing looked like. It was 100% silent. It was 20 feet off the ground. It had lights moving all over it, and it came towards him. And I can't help but wonder, drone? It was all black. It moved in slow motion, but it seemed to be defying gravity. And it looked like it was scanning the ground. He was watching it, and when he moved, his joints cracked, and the lights went off, and it turned towards him. It hovered 15 to 20 feet off the ground and moved slowly away and disappeared over the ridge. What was it? He asked. Advanced tech? I think I just asked that. I wonder. For example, here's another example. Ellen was home alone one night, and she drove up to her gate, and there was a dark triangle aircraft with no noise, 20 to 30 feet above her car. She saw it clearly. It had multicolored lights, and it followed her to the house. She went in and called Tom, and she was freaked out. He calmed her down. Later, she was eating dinner and washing dishes. I don't know. I would have gone to bed and pulled the covers over my head. She looked out the window and saw a large RV parked in the pasture. The inside of the RV was lit up, and she saw a desk in it and saw a black figure sit at the desk. It had a black uniform with a headgear. It stood up, and it was about 7 feet tall. It seemed to stare at her. And so she called Tom, and he got in the car and drove all night to come home. So they went to the site where she'd seen the RV and saw huge footprints in the mud, 18 inches long. But they weren't military boots. They were weird footprints. She stopped going outside at night, finally. And this says, finally, did she consider it maybe dangerous? I don't know if that was me or the book that said that. Chapter 7, Chupas. So their fear was justified. Similar objects that they had seen have been linked to human injury and death in Brazil. A box-shaped object that has a sound of a motor like a fridge called a chupa. There's been a lot of them cited. In 1980, Jacques Vallée, our friend, went to investigate the chupas and the associated casualties. And about it, he wrote Confrontation, a Scientist's Search for Alien Contact. And he described 5 corpses. He said there was a box-like UFO with powerful light beams. Mostly, they went after hunters. And the hunters would get chased by these UFOs. The objects that they saw weren't big enough to hold a person, they didn't think. So, for example, one victim was shocked by a big ray of fire that came out of his chupa. He was terrified and he died in 3 days. And they said this was a bit like an electric arc with pulsating colors and a bad smell. A local doctor in November of 77 had more than 35 patients who had lesions to their face and thorax, like radiation. They got red, their hair fell out, their skin turned black after being exposed to one of these things or to several of these things. So they published a comprehensive list of symptoms these people experience. This is really weird. Weakness, some could hardly walk, dizziness and headaches, loss of sensitivity with numbness and trembling, pallid complexion, low arterial pressure, anemia with low hemoglobin levels, blackened skin where the light had hit with several red-purple circles, hot and painful, 2 puncture marks inside the red circles resembling mosquito bites, hard to the touch. Hair in the blackened area fell out and did not rejuvenate, as if the follicles had been destroyed, but no gastrointestinal symptoms, which you would expect with exposure to radiation. The victims felt frozen and heavy. They couldn't make a sound. They felt hot, and they either died or they got better. Okay. But it took about a week. They lingered for about a week before it went one way or the other. So the question is, was this microwaves? Was it radiation? What was this? Valet asked, were they deliberately being killed, or was it just to stun them and the people were too close, or it was too high of a dose accidentally? There's a book by Bob Pratt called UFO Danger Zone, and his premise is that not all UFOs are benign. There's a writer, Professor David, I can't remember his last name. It'll come to me, and he feels the same way. They're not all benign. So, for example, outside Houston, in a rural area, 1 man and 3 women were in a car, and a bright lit object in the sky appeared. They could see it. It blocked the road in front of them. It was huge and silent. It sent down kind of a ray of fire as it hovered. It was like a diamond of fire, they said. It had a ring of blue lights around it. It beeped, and they couldn't understand why it was kind of there and not looking like it was sure it was going to stay there. They felt like it was having engine trouble. They got out to look at it. 2 of them got right back in the car. No, thank you. I don't want any part of this. One walked all the way around it and touched the door handle of this thing, but it was too hot. And so as it began to fly off, a large number of helicopters appeared, tried to encircle it, and flew off with this thing. Inside the car was really, really hot. So as they drove off, the object was still visible ahead, surrounded by 23 helicopters. At home, the woman who was outside of the car the longest fell ill. The following morning, so her name is Betty. Betty moved to Vicky's house. Vicky was one of the other women, and all 3 there cared for her. Betty's condition continued to deteriorate, and 3 days later, she was taken to the hospital. The burns and swelling had so radically altered Betty's appearance that friends who came to visit her in the hospital didn't recognize her. Her hair began to fall out, and her eyes became so swollen she was unable to see for a week. doctors examined all three of them intensively and determined their conditions suggested they'd been exposed to radiation, possibly ionizing UV or infrared. The injuries were not entirely consistent with either only. Some also suspected that microwave radiation may have literally cooked Betty. Betty died of cancer in 1998, possibly as a result of the radiation she received. Regardless of whether the object they encountered was a secret government project or something else, the injuries they received were real. Chapter 8, The Window. It was common for the Gormans to spot a large orange object in the sky. They were always seeing it, and it would change shape and distance from them. They used binoculars and a telescope to watch it. It made no sound. In the middle of it, they saw another sky, like it was a window portal in the sky, bright orange with a view into a sky in the middle of it. At night on the ranch, the windows showed a blue sky, like daylight blue sky in the middle of the night, surrounded by this orange object. So was this looking into a different dimension or reality? One time, instead, it looked like three-dimensional onion in the middle, and it seemed to be fast moving. There was a black object coming from the portal, the hole, and then it vanished. Tom wondered, was the ranch some sort of dimensional doorway? Tom noticed that his vantage point determined whether the orange area was visible or not. Why, and therefore, why didn't all people see it? Because it was best seen directly opposite from it. And if you were at a different angle, it wasn't apparent. It was only clearly seen directly from the house. Chapter 9, Vanished. So, as I've made a point of saying, Tom was obsessed with his cattle. And he searched on horseback through the snow for 24 hours once for a missing cow. The tracks showed the cow running, which was very unusual in the snow. Cows didn't do that. And it was going very, very fast. He could tell how, I don't know, somehow by looking at the tracks. And it was wildly out of control in its path. But he didn't see anything chasing it, no predator tracks. And these cattle tracks vanished in the middle of a clearing. He said it looked like a 1,000-pound cow got lifted up in the middle of a bad snowstorm. They never saw the cow again. It happened to 4 more cows in the period of a few months. He found one mutilated, its insides missing through a perfectly circular incision with no blood. And he had just seen it 20 minutes earlier. It was perfectly fine. What is the name of that book? I think it's called High Stranges. Linda Moulton Howe did a couple of books, and one of them is all about the research she did. She was a journalist, a science journalist for a newspaper in Eastern Oregon, Washington, I don't remember. And it was rural, and they were getting reports of animal mutilations, and they asked her to investigate it for the newspaper. And that's how she got down the path of where she is today. She's fabulous. If you haven't seen her YouTube channel, you should watch her. So Ellen was becoming paranoid. She was beginning to feel like she was being watched all the time. And things kept disappearing and showing up again in weird places. Tom, 3 months later, found another mutilated cow. He'd seen weird lights flying low over the cows the night before. And when they found the body, it had weird brown gel-like liquid near it on the ground, but he went to get something to put it in, and when he came back, it had soaked into the ground. And now they were seeing the lights quite often. They noticed that the mutilated cows decayed much slower than normal, and that all of them were excised with precision, like surgical precision. And keep in mind, this is in the middle of a field. Usually it happened in bad thunderstorms with heavy lightning. Tom was very upset about losing these valuable animals. Apparently they were worth a ton of money. He thought it was somebody sneaking in, maybe the military, someone testing advanced technology and using his animals as guinea pigs. He didn't realize that these incidents had been happening for a very long time because nobody was talking. Okay, we're on chapter 10, mutes. So this would happen at night to healthy cattle. In 1975 to 1977 in Colorado, 200 cattle were mutilated in 2 counties. The governor consulted with the Cattlemen's Association, calling it one of the greatest outrages in the history of Western cattle industry. And they had a lot of experts checking out the situation. They could not find evidence of any kind of animal predator. I have done her book, and I don't remember if it was one of the videos that I had to get rid of a year or so ago. I had to delete 1,000 videos. That's a story for another day. Anyway, they didn't know, but there were thousands reported in 15 different states. They actually had the association do a hearing on it in 1979 in Albuquerque. It was especially a problem because it freaked out the ranchers, and they were shooting at everything in the sky, including, without realizing it, low-flying National Guard and helicopters. Then there was a formal investigation in New Mexico by a former FBI agent. And his area actually was bank robberies, and he didn't do any necropsies, and he didn't do any pathology, and he really did not study it adequately. So the question was, what were they? Some kind of covert disease studies being done by the government, or were they just attempting to freak people out because they were certainly freaked out? There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of tracks, no sign of footprints, no sign of tires. Okay, there's a huge list, a big list of law enforcement people, local law enforcement people who took this all seriously. Colorado, Utah, Montana, Texas, Alabama, New Mexico. And actually, not in this book, but I think in Linda Moulton Howe's book, there were instances all over the country, and they weren't all cattle. There were sheep, there were horses, dogs, cats, just very strange, all documented. So it's still an enigma. Nobody's ever been caught in the act. Nobody has ever left any evidence that they could think of. They have no idea. But interestingly, there are similar reports coming from England and Scotland from 1810. Jacques Vallée recorded a report from 1890. A farmer walked out to see a cigar-shaped craft rising up with a cow on a rope. The craft fled. The cow, they dropped the cow. The cow was found dead. I'm sorry. The craft fled with the cow, but the cow was found dead the next day, cut up and burned in a field. There's a famous case of the horse called Lady in Colorado in 1967. You'll have to go back and look at the video or read Linda Moulton Howe's book. It's a lengthy story. Only a minority of the events are even reported. Often people write it off to some sort of association with the satanic cult. And, the question here is this psychological warfare? What is this? Before the Gormans, there were incidents in the basin in the 70s and in the 60s also on the ranch. They were so frequent that a famous Colorado investigator flew to that space to check it out. Veterans who go to this, veterinarians, vets can mean more than one thing. Veterinarians who go to the scene say that they've never seen evidence of predators, and that the damage done is not predator damage, that it's deliberate and surgical and precise. It's not unheard of to lose a number of animals from one ranch. But the Gormans were feeling pretty harassed. Now, chapter 11, we'll talk about orbs. One evening, they noticed their animals were restless and they saw a blue orb flying around the horses. The horses didn't react to it. This orb was flying around their heads and the horses didn't react. Very quickly, the orb came to within 20 feet of them, of the horses. It looked like a clear shell with swirling blue liquid or clouds or something inside. And they could hear static, crackling. But suddenly, now this is the Gormans, suddenly, they're observing this, they suddenly felt an overwhelming dread or fear, almost like a panic attack. Both of them. They shone a flashlight on the orb and it sped into the trees and maneuvered through the trees like it was under intelligent control. And then it shot out of sight. Now, Ellen fell to her knees crying. Tom could barely stand. He felt so weak. But the fear was completely gone. So they had like a post-adrenaline reaction. They knew it had manipulated their emotion. Ellen wanted to leave the ranch. Finally, this should be called Ellen Comes to Her Senses. In the house, they saw it again outside the window. And the lights inside were dimming and getting brighter while this thing was hovering outside their window. As the orb passed the house and the lights in the yard, the outside lights dimmed too. And then Tom found his post hole digger, the one that got missing. It was 20 feet up in a tree. There were rumors about weirdness at the ranch that were starting to spread farther into the community. A guy showed up wanting to meditate on the land. And there was the sudden sound of cowbells associated with him, and nobody had any cowbells. Tom saw a large object moving as a faint blur between the trees. It burst out, it rushed at this guy sitting meditating, and it roared like a lion, which is interesting. This is also not in the book, but it reminds me of books I've read about Sasquatch. Sasquatch has hypersonic sound. I think that's the title for it. It's what lions and tigers and elephants and really large animals can do. They're able to create a sound that actually creates a blast of air that knocks people over. You see it in cartoons. That's a real thing. And it can be heard at great distances, like several miles away. And it's often used by animals to communicate with each other in their pack or their tribe or whatever you want to call it, their family group. They'll make that sound to continue to communicate at great distances. Sasquatches do that. So it roared like a lion. This meditating stranger jumped back, fell down screaming. The creature rushed back to the trees and vanished, and the stranger was hysterical and crying. He grabbed Tom and wouldn't let go. He's like hugging Tom and wouldn't let him go. He begged Tom to walk with him to his truck. He swore the land was cursed and he never returned. Later, watching the movie Predator, the alien was what they had seen like advanced camouflage. That was, they related to what they had seen, that weird creature. One night they were sitting outside again, Tom was, with 3 cattle dogs. He had all these dogs that were like trained to work, and that's all they did. He saw a flash of blue light in the distance, and the dogs started to growl. This thing was 10 feet off the ground, and it came at Tom. It was an intense blue orb, bigger than a baseball. The dogs went after it, leaping at it, and it almost seemed like it was teasing the dogs and luring them away from the house. It seemed to lure them into the trees. The dogs went after it. Tom heard the dogs cry out in pain, and the next morning he found all 3 in the woods, incinerated. He decided to sell the ranch. The story hit the papers. It got the attention of the National Institute for the Discovery Science. So now we're on part 2 of the book. The investigation begins. Chapter 12, the science. So this group was created to study paranormal incidents with scientific rigor. Instead of just telling stories around the campfire, they decided this deserved their attention. If you want to catch a big fish, the best way is to fish in waters that are unpopulated by other fishermen. So within a few months of joining this brand new organization in the summer of 1966, I, Colin Kelleher, Dr. Kelleher, began to see the National Institute for the Discovery Science, so it's NIDS, as a way to roll back the frontiers of discovery science while working with some of the most brilliant people I had ever met. So in other words, there's not enough study. People write it off. Let's approach this as scientists. World-class scientists formed the advisory board and helped to work on these studies. And they were mainstream scientists. These were not, kooks. The Las Vegas billionaire Bob Bigelow funded it. So when they heard that the Gorman Ranch was for sale, they saw an opportunity because it's right in the center of all this activity. They saw an opportunity and they thought they could set up a lab, sort of a free station in the wild, and they bought the ranch. The Gormans bought a small ranch 25 miles away, and they were glad to be gone. They felt just this sense of fear and revulsion about this land. Tom was upset to be driven off the land. In only 18 months, though, 14 of their cattle died. That's 20% of their herd, and they're worth a lot of money. And he had been, they're each worth about $2,000. Was a huge loss. And he was just overcome by the stress, the lack of sleep. The kids' grades were falling. The family became the joke of the community. This is exactly what happened to Chris Bledsoe and his family when they started talking about the orbs and weird manifestations on their land. In 1996, Tom agreed to be the ranch manager for NIDS. This is the National Institute for Discovery Science. NIDS bought the land, and then they bought a few dozen cows as bait. Tom did the work on the ranch, took care of the animals, and joined the scientists on watch at night. Why did he move? The science team put a trailer on the land, and it became like their laboratory on the property. The author, Dr. Kelleher, felt not right on the ranch. He had an eerie feeling all the time, like they were being watched. Tom showed them 2 of their neighbors' cows that had been mutilated. And behind the trees, they could still smell this acrid smell. They found the 3 20-foot diameter circles of dead grass where the dogs had previously been incinerated. They saw the carcasses of longer dead cows that were very slow to decomp, almost like a year, which is really long. They saw 2 deep holes at a place where the lights had been seen. They were 1 foot deep and several different diameters. The soil was completely missing. But they said it was almost like a cookie cutter had done it. It wasn't a vague impression. It was like cookie cutter holes in the ground. Chapter 13, Approach. So they had this new atmosphere as the scientists became the hunters, hunting with curiosity and not fear. But the phenomena did not change. These scientists argued. Some wanted to use maximum technology, and some said no, it would scare the phenomena into hiding. And Tom kind of agreed with that. He said he wanted to sneak onto the ranch at night. He thought was the best option, like a big game hunter. And he advised using old low-tech video cameras and sneaking up on the lights and the orbs. He had lain in ditches for hours waiting to get a brief video. He was able to do it by being sneaky, and he knew that the phenomena were not omnipotent, or they would have known he was there. But then again, he asked, or am I being reeled in like a fish? The scientists looked at how other investigators had done it. In Hastelen in Norway in 1984, a 36-day study was done where they measured phenomena. They learned a lot about how and what to measure, what to use to measure. They created the automated measurement station in 1998. They got lots of data, but no new understanding. They collected a ton of data about these anomalous things, and they still don't know what they were. They were working with the Italians, a group called EMBLA. They were a radio astronomy group, and they could explain some measurable data, but they never had a full picture of what it was they were looking at, like a full understanding. They said, we don't know what the hell is going on. was their final conclusion. However, the residents of the area had many stories of UFOs, abductions, and other odd events, strange creatures, orbs, etc. There was a big gap between the scientific data collection and the personal narratives. The personal narratives had more interest. The data collection was a bit sterile. So then there's the Gulf Breeze incident in 1990 to 1992, where there were 170 sightings with multiple witnesses. They had a van to study all that was seen, and they sent the stuff that they collected from this like rigged out van to private engineers from Canada and the US. They had put this whole thing together, and then they, helped them. But as soon as the van actually landed, it, drove up and stopped and was in position, the phenomena stopped. September of 96, the scientists included a physicist, a veterinarian, and the author. They set up a ton of equipment, and they hired technological help and investigators. They set up 2 teams at night with walkie-talkies to collect evidence to be sanitized. No, that's not sanitized. That word would be scrutinized by 15-member advisory board. September 16th of 1996 at 1:30 in the morning, they had their first sighting on the ranch. The light appeared over the trees. It was very bright. It was a flare. It hovered 10 minutes. Then it flew up and away. So it was not an aircraft. It had to be a UFO because by definition, it's unidentified. Okay, chapter 14, Cat and Mouse. The investigators worked every night for 2 months. They learned that the phenomena were not limited to the ranch. The Utes had many experiences. White neighbors were slower to admit their experiences, but they had them too. They did dozens of taped interviews. For example, a Mr. Gonzalez lost many cattle, found one inexplicably lying with 2 broken legs. So he went to the barn to get equipment to help her. When he returned, she was 100% gone. A cow with 2 broken legs vanished from a huge field in broad daylight in 10 minutes. An hour later, she was back and she had 4 broken legs. So he guessed she was dropped twice from an aircraft. He told dozens of weird stories about cattle and UFO sightings that he himself had experienced. One evening, November of 96, Tom called the author to describe UFO lights that he'd just seen flying near the ground. The team was coming. They arrived the next morning. They went to the place where Tom saw the UFO, and they saw nothing, and they were able to measure nothing. 3 nights later, the author and one other scientist were closing the lab at 1:30 in the morning, and they got pictures of the silent speeding lights on a craft, but it was a blur. So winter and snow seemed to slow down their studies, and so they don't know how it affected the incidents. In January of 97, Tom reported injuries to 3 calves during a time of a huge snowstorm, 30 below, too cold for predators. One calf had its ear cut. 2 had holes in their eyelids. They called the vet, and 2 vets came together, a young one and an old one. The young one was puzzled. The old one, he just wanted to write it off. Nothing to see here, folks. It was too unconventional. He wanted to avoid the whole topic. He feared ridicule. In March of 97, Tom called the author and said that he had a newborn calf he found dismembered in broad daylight. They rushed to the ranch to check it out. Let me see here. Okay. One more chapter. It's a short one. Chapter 15, The Killing. 3 people went to the ranch, the author, a veterinarian, and a physicist. 5 hours after this call, they were in the field. They saw this poor calf. All of its internal organs were gone. At least half of its body was gone. There was no blood anywhere, not a single drop. It had been, they had been directed to it by a dog who snarled and took off into the woods, and the dog never came back, ever. The incisions on this calf were scalpel precise. The herd was really disturbed. They had 3 dogs in kennels on the property, and they were terrified. They would not come out. They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't drink. The other dog that went off into the woods was never seen again. 2 days later, the dogs in the kennels were still completely traumatized. Tom said all the animals acted like there'd been a predator nearby. At 11 p.m., the dogs started to go crazy. So they drove around the property with a bright spotlight, and they found the cows huddled in a spot. And they saw a large black shadow that was with one cow that it had separated from the herd. They then saw 2 large yellow orbs. The light reflected off the eyes of some huge animal about 20 feet off the ground in a tree. Tom, defending the calves, shot this thing out of the tree. It fell to the ground. But when they walked over, there was nothing on the ground where it had fallen. Tom found it 30 yards away and, saw it and shot it twice, point blank, but it disappeared with no blood and no tracks. They found 1 print. He says, I yelled at the other 2 people to come running. I shone the flashlight, and there it was. It looked unusual. A single large print in the snow with 2 sharp claws protruding from the rear of the mark, going a couple of inches deeper. It almost looked like a bird of prey, maybe a raptor print, but huge, and from the depth of the print, from a very heavy creature. I began videotaping as the physicist unsteadily held the flashlight while looking over his shoulder, waiting for a large wounded animal to charge us. They searched in vain for the others or a body for 2 hours. Tom swore he saw something. He swore he shot it. He swore he hit it twice. And I guess he was like a sharpshooter. The animals, they were in the tree, and one was in the tree and one was on the ground, and he shot them and nothing. The next day, he described the second animal had crouched in the undergrowth as huge, heavily muscled, and looking like a 400-pound wild dog. The animal had been staring at him and had tensed just before springing when Tom had shot it twice from no more than 40 feet. Yet no signs of blood, and 2 confusing, distant, single tracks in the snow added to rather than solved the mystery. It was all very odd. But what was it? So how to even write a report? They didn't even know what to say. It was transient. It was difficult to report. because well, we saw something. You know, what did we see? Well, we don't know what we saw. So that's the end of that chapter, and that's as far as I'm going to go today. This gets weirder, in case it's not weird enough. So this is the end of video number 2, and we'll start number 3 next time. I hope you're enjoying it. It's creepy, but it's at least easier on the brain than the philosophy we did last time. So it's my little gift. Thank you very much for watching, and don't go outside after dark if you live on a cattle farm. Okay, slán go fóill. Slán.